So, Sudden Strike 4 for the PlayStation 4. Now, some of you may remember the early 2000s, late 90s Sudden Strike series on PC. This is a similar game to the Blitzkrieg series. If you've played that, Blitzkrieg is probably a more epic game in terms of scale. I remember you could have up to, almost like 100 or more tanks and armoured vehicles on screen at one time. Sudden Strike was more characteristic for its title, Sudden Strike. You can have a pretty big army of tanks, as we see here, Panzer Grenadiers and so on, but they will go up in smoke fast if you do not maneuver with prudence. So, in case you were not aware, Sudden Strike is an RTS game or a real-time strategy with a top-down view. Certainly not the first, won't be the last. You've got from the beginnings of this kind of genre, from Dune, KKND, Command & Conquer, Age of Empires. Sudden Strike is one of the top World War II ones. And as I was saying, the game is interesting in that you can have a vast array of tanks and soldiers that basically will go up in smoke due to the close arrangement of the fog of war on this game. As you can see, the fog of war is pretty restrictive, so you don't see things coming, and tanks go up definitely a lot quicker than they would perhaps in a real combat zone, but that means that the style of play is that you have to maneuver carefully. You can't just take your forces and run straight at the enemy as you might have been able to in Command & Conquer. If you have more tanks than the enemy, often you could just basically clusterfuck them by sending a lot in. On this, it's more about careful planning and strategizing. Obviously, like trying to flank the enemy is always a good idea. The control system is pretty simple. You can group your units, as you see at the top there. Those shields allow you to group units, create different groups, maybe soldiers, artillery, transport. Then you've got like the tanks and the more heavy vehicles, recon vehicles, armoured cars, and they do have a detailed range. One of the cool points about the Sudden Strike PC game was that they had a lot of authentic weaponry, tanks, and the small arms, right down to the soldiers, the lapels. Really, they were all neatly put together. They even had like a different uniform for a sergeant or a lieutenant, as they say in German. And some of that detail has actually not translated onto this version. The PC version definitely has more detail. I believe the graphics have a bit more charm as well, although they're probably better. The graphics here are probably better. There's something about the older ones that just had that kind of gritty feel to it. So basically, it's similar to the old Sudden Strike games. However, I would say it definitely has a slightly more arcadey style, which, to be honest, is expected as it's a console game. But I think they've got the balance like fairly well between, for like an Anorak on a PC where every button on the keyboard does something, in comparison to a console gamer who's used to a very sort of linear RTS, such as like a lot of the early Command and Conquer games, where it's just point and click. This is somewhere in the middle. It's kind of easy to pick up and hard to master, which is always a winner. So a lot of the navigation is done through wheels. There's a wheel that tells your men whether to lie down, stand up, assault, etc. But it will go through that, and the early levels are a lot easier and effectively a tutorial to learn the game. Then there's a wheel which is like a perk wheel. You can see you can get recon on that. You could get dive bombers like a Stuka, or you can call in a fighter plane to spray the enemy with machine guns, and all kinds of good stuff like that. Maybe long range artillery shots and so on. Like any perks in RTS games, especially I remember the Lord of the Rings RTS, Lord of the Rings Return to Middle-earth 1 and 2, Middle-earth 1 and 2 RTS games, they had some awesome perks, and the perks, as you would expect, can be pretty devastating. However, moving on to the difficulty of the game, so yeah, a well-placed perk can certainly take out a ton of enemy tanks, but that won't necessarily help you, because unless you play on easy mode, which is probably a bit too easy, kind of boring, I would say medium's pretty much more like hard, and hard is more like very hard. It's not a game that's just easy and a breeze to get through. Everything has to be planned carefully. You can't move your units in too fast. If you move them in too fast, you get a sudden strike, same as the title, and everything just goes up in smoke. As you can see, the tanks, it all happens way too fast sometimes, but one of the cool things is you can actually pick up and repair stuff. You can repair things, you can repair and use enemy vehicles, which is kind of crucial on certain levels. Especially the level seen here, which is Stalingrad. So overall a pretty good game. I would say it does have, for me, less of an exciting feel than the PC one. I don't know why. The PC one, although the graphics are weaker and so on, I think it was just made with a bit more detail and effort. But having said that, like, this could have been terrible, and it certainly isn't that. It's not a bad game at all, really. Kind of similar to Men of War, but it's no classic, and I got this for 15 quid. I think it's probably worth 15 quid. You could probably pick it up even cheaper now, I would imagine. And if you like the original Sunstrike series, or if you just like RTS games in general, you can't really go wrong. Although it does feel a little lightweight compared to the more detailed PC versions, you can certainly enjoy immersing yourself in the World War II theatres of war. The visuals are a little bit cartoony, and you get these kind of luminous edges on the vehicles, as you see when you roll the cursor over them. I'm not really a big fan of that, but at least they've a lot of the background art and the soldiers having, even down to their weapons like rifles or grenades, got medics, guys with binoculars. The detail's pretty good. At least they've kind of done a homage to the original series in that sense. So overall, I think I would just call this like a Sudden Strike Light. It's kind of got the feel of the original, but they've taken all the sugar out. You know, so well, maybe that's a bit harsh. No, it's a good game, but it just feels a little lightweight compared to the original. So I'd have to give this overall, I'm going to give it a, let's see, 7.5 out of 10. I think it's fair. And if you like the series or like these games and you want to play a bit of this casually, go right ahead. As I said, it's not an easy game. You do have to plan and replay missions. But if you like this kind of thing, you should.